Hello, this is Harold Pollack here for another edition of Curbside Consult at healthinsurance.org. Thanks so much for listening. I should say it's a special privilege for me today to be interviewing Luke Shaefer, who just put out a book actually called $2 a Day, Living on Almost Nothing in America, written with Kathryn Edin, the great sociologist. And so thanks so much for being here, Luke. Maybe we should start by having you introduce yourself.
It's my pleasure, Harold. Thanks for having me. I'm associate professor at the University of Michigan in the School of Social Work and the Ford School of Public Policy. And really my work started out focusing on programs for the working poor. And I think as an extension with that and in getting to know Kathy and having her share some of her insights from the field as a qualitative researcher, and I sort of starting out as a numbers guy who uses big survey data, ended up doing this work that resulted in $2 a day.
And now you and I had never met before, is that right?
That's right. Harold is one of my primary mentors, and I think most of what I've done that's good and reasonable probably should be a credit to you, and of course none of the things that I've done wrong should be credited to Harold.
Well, we'll decide that at the end of the conversation. We're proud of you at the University of Chicago, and delighted to talk to you. There's a bunch of political issues and policy issues I want to get into in the book, but maybe you should start by just describing who the people are that you're writing about and kind of how you met them. And you really have some very gripping stories about several families in here. How did you meet these people? And tell me a little bit about what that was about.
Yeah, so this book is not just about poor families. It's about the poorest of the poor families. So we, as a result of some data work we had done, had seen a big rise in the number of families, according to our most reliable data, that were surviving on virtually no cash income. So they might have food stamps, now called SNAP, or they might have public health insurance. Some didn't have either of those either, but they were having no cash. And as a result of some work we did, we were getting a lot of questions about what does this look like? How do families survive? How do they get into these circumstances? And those were really, I think, qualitative questions at the start. So Kathy, who's a trained ethnographer, has been doing this work for a long time, started to recruit families in Chicago the first year. I think we started out in 2012. And the next year we moved to Cleveland, Ohio. So we thought of Chicago as a quintessential American city. A city had been a site of a lot of the great works on poverty. And we moved to Cleveland, a city that had actually been quite affluent 50 years ago and is quite poor now. We saw in the data that there was a cluster of families in the South. So we went and opened up a field site in Johnson City, Tennessee, which is in the Tri-Cities area in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Actually, a place that things had gotten better over time since it was sort of the region that sparked, partially sparked the war on poverty in the 1960s, but still had pockets of deep need. And then we went to the Mississippi Delta, which is a place that has been deeply poor for a long time. We did things like hang out at food banks or family homeless shelters and invite people to talk to us. We also recruited research collaborators who had strong ties in the communities that we were entering in and would ask them to sort of tell families about what we were doing and find families. And so we'd usually start just by trying to do an assessment of what their income was and what their circumstances were to see if we thought if they were in the big data sets that we had started with, would they register under this $2 per person per day threshold in cash income. And then we just went from there and tried to follow them. We've been following families for a couple of years now and see what happened to them and how they got there. And as we learned things, we'd go back to the large-scale data to see if what we found there sort of matched what we saw in the field.
There, I must say, I also teach. I teach in the School of Social Service Administration, and one of the striking things about the families that you describe is, I mean, they are really the groups of people that we see in some of our interventions that really serve the most severely poor people, uh, and they're very different, as you mentioned, from most poor people in America in some ways. You know, the typical poor person in Chicago has a low-wage job, uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
doesn't live, is struggling economically, but doesn't live the kind of life that lives a much more stable life. They're not selling plasma and some other things we'll get into. They're just working poor folk, or working poor folks trying to get enough hours at their job. But there's a level of desperation that I think would be a lot of readers would find, will find uh, kind of shocking. Uh, and
Yeah.
one of the questions I wanted to ask you. I mean, there's a bunch of questions about, is this going up or down, which we don't particularly have to get into. I think our healthinsurance.org folks are not so interested in the econometrics of SIP, but I think some of those issues need to be mentioned. And it seems to me that over the past 20 years, overall the American welfare state has gotten more generous, but it's gotten selectively more generous for working poor people, and it's easier to get non-cash benefits than to get cash benefits for a lot of these folks. And uh, why is it, if we've expanded Head Start and we've expanded food stamps and we've expanded Medicaid and a bunch of programs for people that give them things that aren't cash, why is it so why is it so debilitating when people have no cash but they have access to food pantries and the other things that you talk about in your book?
That's a great question. I think it's at the core of the book. As you stated, a lot of what we've done, a lot of the changes we've made to the government social safety net have been really positive. So the expansion of the earned income tax credit, the maybe one of the most popular and most poorly named programs. When I mention EITC, my wife's eyes glaze over. Has been really in a lot of ways a resounding success. I think you can see this big uptick in labor force participation as people get a wage supplement when they go to work through the tax code. It's well liked, and we actually sort of point to that as an important feature as we go forward and thinking about what we should do. But overall, there has been a decline of government assistance for folks who aren't able to find and maintain a job. The EITC, which we spend billions and billions more on than we ever did on cash welfare, you only get it if you have a job and you're able to maintain a job. So when you fall into a spell of extreme poverty, not only do you lose the wages from work, but you also lose some of your assistance. Now, we see the important role that SNAP food stamps plays. But what really came through, I think, in the stories for us was the importance of cash when you're at the bottom. When you're in one of these spells of extreme poverty, you need some flexibility to be able to pull yourself out of it. And in the United States, that flexibility only comes from cash, right? So in any other sort of in-kind benefit that you have, such as the food pantry, you're completely restricted in what you do. And I think really the proof in the pudding for us was the extent to which these families spent an inordinate amount of their time actually trying to generate that little bit of cash that they needed to put underwear on their kids or go to the thrift store and get a decent pair of clothes for them to go to school, to try to stay wherever they are for one more night. So that's when we get into the survival strategies such as selling blood plasma or selling your food stamps. In some cases, selling sex. We saw examples of people selling sex for food, for the ability to stay and doubled up in the house that they were with somebody for another night, even to pay the cell phone bill, because through it all, these families really that we met thought of themselves as workers, and you can actually see this in the big data too, that there is this attachment to the labor market. But I think because of the instability of their jobs as well as the instability in their personal lives, these things just sort of collide to make it very hard to maintain stable employment.
So again, you're here watching Curbside Consult on healthinsurance.org, and I'm Harold Pollack, and I'm talking to Luke Shaefer of the University of Michigan about his new book with Kathryn Edin, $2 a Day. And you just left off discussing the sort of survival strategies that people turn to generate some cash, and they spend a huge amount of their day actually trying to scrape up cash. It seems like it eats up a lot of their time. One thing that struck me about your book is it's kind of hard to put a white hat or a black hat on a lot of these families as far as, are they the deserving poor, are they the undeserving poor? The same people at different moments are kind of a little bit of both. And
yeah.
And there's and your book is pretty candid that some of the reasons why these folks are in the situations that they're in really comes to their own decisions and their own family circumstances. That it's not this book is not particularly a liberal propaganda piece. There's a lot of pathology, for want of a better term, that's showing up in their lives and in the lives of the people around them that is hurting them. I'm not sure if that has come up. You've done a million. At this point, you're doing the...
No, it hasn't come up. It hasn't come up, and I actually think it's a really important point. Often when we make these distinctions between the deserving poor and the undeserving poor, and frankly, we do it every day in social policy, talking about the working poor and the not working poor. These are sort of static distinctions that help us understand things in a very simplistic way. When, especially with this population, I think you're absolutely right. It's far more fluid. So we have Ray McCormick, for example, in Cleveland, Ohio, who actually worked at Walmart for 6 months. She was named Cashier of the Month twice. She became the fastest cashier because she would read the barcodes of the most popular produce into her cell phone and let it play overnight. And as she said, let her subconscious do the work.
Puts me to shame. Yeah,
that's right. But 6 months in, she got into the truck she shared with her uncle, and the gas light was on. There was no gas left, even though she'd given the money to provide the gas. And they get into a very serious confrontation, and she calls Walmart and says, "Is there any way to help me get to work?" And her manager says, "If you can't get in, don't bother coming in." And this sort of leads to her, I think, spiraling downwards into one of these spells. But
when you say one of these
spells, what's that?
When you say one of these spells, a lot of the people in this book have some sort of mental health issue that's lurking or that's obvious.
That's absolutely right. I think across the board. One thing I was going to say with Ray is that she'll often go hungry for days and days, but she'll never give up her cigarettes. So I think cigarettes is the one thing, even when she was doubled up, and we think people in her house were basically confiscating her food stamps and keeping her from eating. She always had enough cigarettes, and so there's lots of stuff where you can point and you can say, well, that's a bad choice. We actually had a chapter in the book that didn't make it into the book. It was in the it was in the outline, but it sort of didn't end up getting worked in. But it was called "Bad Moves and Hard Luck." The idea being, if you want to point to sort of individual mistakes, I think you can find one across any of these, people. But they also seem to be sort of in a system that is incredibly unforgiving for them. That they almost get punished, I think, for being poor in a way that a lot of their fellow citizens further up the economic ladder are almost protected. In Ray's case, it was pretty clear that the cigarettes were chronic pain management type, intervention she was doing for herself.
Yeah, and it's a source of pleasure in your life that doesn't have a whole lot of other pleasures in it.
That's right.
That is that's a real thing. The other aspect of her misfortune, many other people's misfortunes, are these folks have to really lean on the people around them and their family, their immediate social network, the people that they count on, many of whom suck. I mean, they're just repeatedly people, and
Yep.
you're doubling up with someone, and either that relationship goes badly, or you discover that these people really are not trustworthy. I mean, there's one horrible case where there's sexual abuse uh, by a relative, but a lot of these people are both dragging down and being dragged down by their family
Yep.
members. I mean, sort of
Yep.
the house. The description is 22 people living in the same house, and I mean, sort of very difficult circumstances in a way that you or I, if we had a really serious problem, our family connections would probably they might annoy us in all sorts of ways. I could talk about it in other broadcasts, but they wouldn't be
Right.
causing that problem.
Yeah, I got into the literature on adverse childhood experiences, looking back at, what are sometimes referred to as ACE, and there's some literature on this, such as actually the prevalence of things like sexual and physical and emotional abuse and emotional neglect are far more widespread than people might think. A lot of Americans have these sort of experiences, but we don't talk about them, and you can trace the effect of those experiences throughout a person's life course and their health, right? Clearly different health outcomes in adulthood, and I think we're starting to have some evidence of socioeconomic outcomes. And for us, as we were, meeting families in different places, I can't off the top of my head think of one that doesn't have a heartbreaking story of some sort of physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, and just the sort of the confluence of volatile employment and unstable housing just leads them, I think, to be in circumstances where they're put at greater risk. And I do think there's some element of families, the mothers who had the similar experience in daughters, and almost just everything coming together to make it so that these experiences were just so very common. And then you get into the literature on toxic stress and how this doesn't just affect people emotionally, but repeated exposure to stress and strain, I think we have pretty good evidence, affects people physiologically. And I'd be reading these academic papers about toxic stress leading to memory loss, and then I'd go visit with Ray McCormick, and you would see it sort of so clearly that was affecting her. And I think a lot of times we sort of focus on those things as individual level failings, but really they're very structural, at least from the perspective of being related to the circumstances of a person's life.
Yeah, again, this is Curbside Consult. This is Harold Pollack talking to Luke Shaefer. Since healthinsurance.org does have the word health in it, well, we probably should talk about some health policy. Are these folks covered by Medicaid that you've been interviewing, or how do they get their basic medical care if they have no money?
Yeah. The children, I would say, more than any other program, were covered by Medicaid. It seemed like the most common benefit that people had. And we see that in the data too. And a lot of adults, we had some examples of adults who wouldn't be on it. Sometimes I think with Medicaid, when you have somebody, we talked about the fluidity of people's circumstances. They were working and they're not working. We'd run into problems with that. And this wasn't really an area of my expertise, but I did sometimes worry about the quality of the care that people were getting. You would hear, and you could never know because you weren't in there with the doctor. But I would question when I would see somebody with 12 or 15 very serious medications, if this was a sort of a good sort of regime for them, that was it really possible that these things weren't sort of interacting with each other, and especially when that prescribed to someone in the circumstances people were in. um, I just I couldn't always tell, and we didn't write about this a lot in the book because I don't have anything definitive to say, but I couldn't always tell about the quality of the care that people did receive.
By the way, one of the ironies in that is I'm sure for some of the people in this book that state and federal taxpayers were paying $15,000 or $20,000 a year for a whole variety of medications and so on, which we can get to
Right.
those folk and for their kids, but we can't get $800 a month for some sort of
Right.
stable living arrangement, which would probably do more for their health than what we're able to do in Medicaid.
I'd love to do a randomized trial where we provided people with the cash that we pay for in health benefits, and sort of see what leads to better results, putting money in people's directly in people's hands, or giving them access to an expensive system.
There, of course, what I'd love to see, I'm a strong believer, as you know, in universal health coverage and Medicaid. I'm really proud of the Medicaid expansion and health reform, and wish it could get to the Mississippi Delta where these people were just getting nothing. I wish we could figure out how Medicaid could actually be a lever for that. I mean, it seems to me that Medicaid could at least pay for some good social workers to come to help Ray or help other people that are in this book. Say, your life is so messed up. What can we do to try to stabilize it? So that, because you can see the children in these stores are going to end up, they're bearing the trauma from all of what's happening too, and but I guess that's asking for a different world than the one that we live in. You do mention, by the way, one particular issue in Medicaid, which is the lack of access to dental care, and how does that show up in these stories?
Yeah, so I don't know. I have done some work on access to dental care, so I don't know if I was looking for it, but especially with the adults, you would see very clear oral health problems that were visible. And I was very aware when Jennifer Hernandez in Chicago was spending 10 months going from family homeless shelter to family homeless shelter, and she just had this really sort of clear problems with her gums. You wonder, and I think we've got some pretty good evidence that can really deter her ability to get work, because one of the first things we judge people with is their teeth, and we know there's a lot of associations between oral health and physical health. In her case, I actually think the adult Medicaid dental services, they're often one of the things I think that's on the chopping block when state budgets tighten up. So there had actually been a reduction in what was available to her. But in a lot of cases, what is available is extractions rather than restorative care, which doesn't help with the sort of societal integration element.
In fact, you can get an extraction, but you can't get a thing put in to fill in where the extraction occurred.
Right. So Ray McCormick actually in Cleveland had lost all of her teeth. I think she had some. She's about she's in her early 20s.
Wow.
I think she had some sort of serious oral health problem. She was actually abandoned by her father died when she was, I think, 11 or 12, and her mother had abandoned her, and her mother did send the survivor's check from Social Security, and somebody took her in and then kicked her out at 18 when the benefits stopped coming.
Yeah.
And she does a good job of hiding it.
She's the one who would laugh and sort of cover her mouth.
Yeah. And when we took her out to eat a couple times, and you always noticed she would get the boneless chicken fingers or whatever, just things that were easy to eat. And she did, I think, get a pair of dentures, if I'm getting the term right, but they were incredibly uncomfortable and didn't fit well, and she just thought it was better to go without on most occasions.
Was it hard for you to bear witness to this kind of suffering with really all the people that you were talking to? It must have been a difficult experience to be constantly interacting and how
Yeah.
And there's not, especially given the nature of a book like this, there's not so much you can do to actively
Right.
change someone's situation.
Right. Yeah. I was new to this sort of stuff, and I've done some interviews in my scholarly work, but I was mainly a data guy. So I remember the very first time I went down to Chicago, and Kathy had been recruiting families, and I sort of went down and met each one of them, and by the end of the day, I just went back to my hotel room and cried myself to sleep, because you just hear a heartbreaking story. And at least my impulse, I'm going to be honest, at the very start was, oh, I can't believe this. This story is just too outrageous. And then you go to the next person and they tell something that seems at the moment to be even more outrageous. And you just really feel for the lives that these families live. On the other side, though, it was one of the most meaningful experiences of my life, I've got to say. The ability to get to know these families, get to know special people who I never would have known anyway, otherwise. And they felt very generous to me. Like the people who we talked to, I think, really appreciated the opportunity to tell their story and talk about what they were going through. And in a way, it felt, as a trained social work researcher, there had a bit of a therapeutic sort of element to it. So, it was very meaningful for me, even though it was very hard.
Here, again, this is Curbside Consult. This is Harold Power talking with Luke Shaefer. Let's talk a little bit about some of the survival strategies that people use. So how do people survive when they have no cash? What are the types of things that you were seeing?
Well, we saw all sorts of things, and we tried to write about a couple of them that we saw, from field site to field site, from family to family. Selling blood plasma was very common. In fact, with a lot of the parents who were selling plasma, you could often see a little divot sort of right in the crease of their elbow that maybe looked like a track line, but it was really just a scar from giving plasma so much.
How much money would people make by selling plasma?
Yeah, so you can donate plasma about 2 times a week if your body holds up, and you get about $30, I think. I actually think that the first time you do it, you get $30, and you get a little less the second time in a week because your body doesn't quite generate as much. Mm-hmm. But it pays pretty well, relative to the choices people have. And, in a lot of cities, if you were to go, we went to one of the main Cleveland plasma clinics, and there's a bus stop right in front of the plasma clinic. You can just sit there and watch everybody get off the bus, people who do not look good, and go straight into the plasma clinic. In some ways, it's the safest, as I said, it's the safest strategy people have available to them. But it's certainly, when you have somebody like Jessica Compton in Johnson City, Tennessee, who tries to do it 2 times a week, she has this constant worry that her iron's not going to be high enough to allow her to sell her plasma, to get the money that she needs. We saw a lot of examples of people selling their food stamps, now called SNAP. So the way this would work is it played out in a lot of different ways, but probably the most common is you'd find a retailer who was known to do this sort of thing, and you'd go in and you might take $100 of your food stamps and ring it through for groceries that don't exist, and then the merchant would give you back $60 in return. So you start to get a sense for how much people need that little bit of cash to survive, that they're taking a 40% loss in the purchasing power of their benefits because they need that flexibility of cash more than they need the food stamps, and often I think would go hungry by the end of the month as they waited. Or in the Mississippi Delta, we had examples where the lights would be turned off, or the whole family wouldn't eat for a week or two to keep the lights on as they waited. We saw scrapping as a strategy. You actually kind of need some resources to make that work. So this is a case where you might find old air conditioning units or tin cans in the dumpster. You take them to a scrapyard, and for an air conditioning unit, apparently there's a lot of metals in there, and you can actually get I think $15 for it is what we've heard. But again, you sort of need some resources to make this happen, like a truck to take stuff, and it doesn't make as much sense if you really have no assets at all. And we did see some examples of the trading of sex among the moms, and sadly among some of the teenage daughters, where you might trade sex for food in some cases. In one case, there was a family had a storage unit, and so the guy, the friend was paying the bill on the storage unit so that they could keep their stuff from while they were going from homeless shelter to homeless shelter.
By the way, it's ironic that in the book at one point you refer to that as sort of selling your body, and of course plasma is like literally selling your body, and
right. When that's the only asset you have left, that's what you gotta sort of make work for you, unfortunately.
Yeah, but it's and there's, needless to say, a lot of the characters that these women meet in the book with whom they have some sort of transactional sex are not always the greatest people to have in your life for other reasons. One being if they get interested in your teenage daughter or whatever else is, whatever else is going on. By the way, one of the interesting things about the selling of the food stamps, just from the pure, I want to understand the economics of this. If you eat all of if you get $300 a month in food stamps and you spend more than $300 on food every month, there's really no reason to ever sell your food stamps. You just use them for the first $300 of the food that you buy, and then you take that cash and you use it. Maybe you buy a little bit more food, but you also buy sneakers for your kids or whatever else you need. And that's kind of nothing interesting about that. That's just, most people who have food stamps, that's pretty much what they do. In order
substitute,
you just substitute. You use it to substitute for cash, and it's kind of just like you're getting cash. In fact, you and I have given students this homework assignment 1,000,000 times.
That's right.
But one of the points that you made in the book is that, first of all, if you really have nothing, you may cut down on your food to below the amount that you would spend on your food stamp. But also, you can get food more readily than you can get other stuff you need. So you can go to the food pantry and load up on ramen noodles or whatever else you can get from the food pantry, and then that you're not eating real well, but you're eating, and then and then you can sell the food stamps because it's just easier to find opportunities to get food. And I hadn't really thought about that as carefully before reading this, but. I don't know, but it's sort of striking that that we are selectively helpful to these people. We give them access to food, probably some other necessities, but not other things that they need just as much. It's not going to be these sort of underwear pantry as readily accessible for your kid, but your kid needs underwear.
Yeah, it seems like there's a gradation of we're willing to give food, and then we're willing to give some stuff to kids, and we're least willing to do sort of anything flexibly for the parents. Private charity was an interesting sort of element. I guess I want to track back to the food stamps thing and say that we actually the USDA does audits and tracks fraud, and we think it's actually pretty limited, as you said, because just quite frankly, most recipients don't have a reason. If you have other cash, you don't have a reason to sell your SNAP, and we actually think it's gone down quite a bit over the last few decades. There's sort of less food stamps fraud than there was. So yeah, this is a particular story of people who are constrained at the bottom. Now, just to mention the private charity thing, one of the things that struck us was how uneven the availability of stuff was across the sites where we were at. So a place like Chicago, we found actually to be pretty well resourced. There's a fair number of family shelters, enough that people could go from place to place because they usually limit how long you can stay there. Food banks, free giveaways. So Jennifer Hernandez particularly enjoyed taking her kids to the Shakespeare in the parks.
Yeah, she was very entrepreneurial.
Yeah, and using the public libraries. I think the public library system are good. And if you ever go into a public library system, look at the computers, I bet a majority of them are, at any given time, are being used to fill out online job applications. So they really, I think, provide a core service. In Cleveland, I think there's maybe less. Johnson City, a little bit less than that. The Tri-City Appalachian area where we were at. In Mississippi Delta, there was virtually no charity. Just no food banks except in a couple of the big cities, but especially in the small towns, there would be no way to get there.
It was striking. By the way, I should mention on the food stamps, just to close that out, people can only get like 60 cents on the dollar when they sell their food stamps. So it's a pretty big markdown. And plus, you're describing it's a pretty serious crime to sell your food stamps, which from an economist's point of view, that's a little nutty, but that's what it is. And with the movement to a sort of the EBT card, it's a little bit more secure and a little bit more verifiable that somebody has to enter a PIN. So if you're
that's right.
So it's a little bit more risky. It's not like you're just handing somebody a coupon that you can sell them and they can then go use. It's really you have to trust them with the PIN or the.
So if we gave families the option to get, say, $100, say they're getting $400 in food stamps, we gave them the option to take $100 as cash, we would actually be getting more resources to the families in our book without spending an extra dollar on benefits, right? Because if we're right, and this is pretty common among families who are constrained, then they're losing all this purchasing power because they have to sell. But it's just not something we as a country are willing to do. And in fact, I think if you sort of suggested this to food stamps advocates, they'd be very wary of it because they don't want to do anything to sort of bring an added public stigma to the program.
This is Harold Pollack interviewing Luke Shaefer on Curbside Consult. And let's close out with some discussion of policy. So one option, as you just discussed, would be maybe we should give out more cash as part of food stamps. And of course, if we did that, the reason we give out food stamps at all is because it's easier to get public support to give a voucher for food than it is to give cash. So you can understand why advocates would be nervous about that, especially if it brings in a whole conversation about selling the food stamps and stuff. But what are some policies that you would suggest we should be doing for these folks?
Yeah, I think fixing the TANF program, the cash welfare program, it's something we need to take a very close look at. And a lot of it has to do with the structure of policy, the way the program is set up. If you have people on cash assistance, the primary program in a state, there's a lot of requirements imposed upon you with work requirements and such. But the way the block grant was created means that states can really use the money for other stuff if they don't use it for cash assistance. So what you see in a lot of places is these extremely low caseloads that, there's just no reason to think that the caseload should be that low. As there should be a lot more people who need it. And the states are using the money for other stuff, a lot of times stuff they would have paid for otherwise, like the child welfare system or, in some cases, things we think are good. But, this is so much so that only about 30% of dollars that are allocated to the TANF program actually go to basic assistance. And the vast, 70% of the dollars have been reallocated to other stuff. So I think if we're going to have a program called Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, maybe we should start by making it do what we think it's supposed to do and not, in a lot of cases, be a welfare program for states versus for people.
By the way, just to back up one moment, traditional welfare was established in 1935 in the New Deal, was changed dramatically in the late 1960s, and was and basically provided an open-ended cash payment to non-working single moms. And
right. It was an entitlement program that if you were eligible, met the requirements, you could get.
And it was probably the most unpopular program in America. And in 1996, as you describe in your book, that program is ended. And Bill Clinton ends welfare as we know it, keeps a campaign promise, and it's turned into an explicitly time-limited program. And in many ways, it was actually, the outcome was not so bad in the mid-1990s when it was first done, partly because the economy was booming.
Right.
And because a lot of other programs were expanded by President Clinton to help working people and to help low-income people. If you asked me 10 years ago, what do I think of welfare reform, I would have said, it's really not as bad as everybody feared it was going to turn out to be. Well, one of the more disturbing things is as the late 1990s turned out to be a pretty unique time where the low-income economy was actually really good for a lot of people, and these single moms actually had jobs they could go to. Comes the Great Recession, there really aren't those jobs. Poverty rate goes up a lot, and the caseload for cash welfare, stays really, really stable, even though the number of people who need it just explodes. And now, I give a much dimmer assessment of welfare reform now than I would have before the Great Recession, having watched this happen. And so just for people.
Well summarized. And we try to go through this in some detail in one of the chapters. And I guess, our primary policy proposal actually starts with what families told us they wanted, which was the opportunity to work, actually. We think we need to increase the number of jobs that are available to families at the very bottom of the economic ladder and try to do some things to improve the quality of the jobs we have. Because families, when we'd ask them, if we come back in a year and you're doing well, what will it look like? They would say with a lot of consistency, I'd be in a job that has stable hours. So getting enough hours is a core dilemma for people at the very bottom of the labor market, and pays maybe 11, 12, if I'm shooting the moon, $13 an hour. And they would often, going back to, you mentioned the sort of clear examples of mental health challenges, they would often point to the fact that when they were working and they had that job and they weren't in foreclosed homes in the dead of Chicago winter, like Jennifer Hernandez was cleaning those homes for a while, they felt like their mental health challenges were most stable. They had the sense of purpose, they had the structure, and I really went in thinking you needed programs that would help people address all these barriers so they could get a job. And it really turned my thinking around, where I think, maybe in some ways access to a job is the first thing we need, and then we should have some services wrapped around that.
It seems like basically these low-skill workers are playing a game of musical chairs, and there's sort of fewer chairs than there used to be, and therefore employers and consumers ultimately, it's us because we shop at Walmart and so
Right.
it's a much less forgiving world. There's really no reason to accommodate the difficulties that these families are facing. From the point of view of the employer, you can get people to agree to come in on flexible work schedule, where flexible means when I want to have them there, I can get them to come, as opposed to
employer flexibility,
and that this sort of shift in the balance of power between workers and employers at the low end of the labor market really makes them into fairly expendable widgets from the point of view of the labor market. If we were in a tight labor market, that Walmart manager might have been thinking, well, this is a good worker. I better, if I
want to keep her.
Yeah, she's going to remember if I give her a lift to work a couple times, she's going to remember it and she might stay. Is in the current environment now. My guess is that there's more to that story. There's always more to the story with every person, and she's, there's always the complexity of no one wears a pure white hat or black hat. But the bottom line is that that there's no real need to accommodate the difficult circumstances or the family life of a lot of these workers, and employers are not doing it. And so measures in one way that just to close out, it seems that things like expanding Medicaid and CHIP and other programs that we've talked about, at least they help workers get things that the labor market is probably not going to give them any other way. It's just hard to see that. I really wonder how high the wage can be for these jobs that you're talking about without some sort of public support for these men and women, because they're just not. There's just more of them than are really needed.
Yeah, I think we need to, and there's some examples of some success where I think it takes government and employers partnering. You've got bad examples of job creation programs that sort of create fake jobs. And so the key is, how do we design good policy? And I really think that we have to evaluate how these such programs work, not just on what they do for the long-term wages, because of all of the things you just mentioned of the, it just being sort of a losing proposition. But, we've got some examples of, if you provide, an effective jobs program for guys returning from prison, we can pay for the cost of that simply in the reduced recidivism involved. And actually, there was an experiment in Milwaukee called New Hope that guaranteed a job and provided some work supports. It actually raised marriage rates among never married mothers. It had nothing to do with marriage, and I think it was a more successful marriage promotion program simply by providing people with sort of the resources to sort of pursue their lives.
And so it makes marriage a realistic possibility for them. Well, Luke, I'm going to close us out so you can continue your celebrity tour. But again, congratulations on the book, and congratulations on you're also, I should say, fairly recently tenured, and
thanks.
So congratulations on a lot of things, and it's been great speaking to you today.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for the great questions, and I think saying some of the things that were in the book maybe more articulately than we did ourselves.
Well, I doubt that, but I'll take the credit for it.